They told me the living quarters would be tight, but I didn't expect to be living in a metal shoebox with a guy who made eye contact like it was a threat. I signed up for the job thinking I'd be working hard and seeing parts of the world most people only dream about. What I didn't plan for was sharing a 6 by 8 foot room with a guy who looked like he wanted to murder me every time I spoke. His name was Wade. He was already in the bunk when I got there, shirt off, wiping grease off his arms with a rag that looked like it had lived 3 lives. He didn't stand up, just gave me one quick glance, then went back to cleaning up like I wasn't there. "Hey," I said, dropping my duffel on the floor. "I'm Tyler, new crew." Wade gave a grunt that could have meant, "Hello, leave me alone," or "I hate you already." It was hard to tell. He had the kind of body you get from years of physical labor. Not the polished gym look, but functional muscle, lean and knotted, like rope. His tan was deep and uneven, like he lived half his life in the sun and didn't give a shit about sunscreen. His hair was buzzed close on the sides and just long enough on top to look like it had been cut by someone with a knife. Not bad looking, just rough. Edges everywhere. For the first few days, he barely spoke more than a few words to me. Our schedule didn't help. We worked opposite shifts, and most of the time we only saw each other during meals or when one of us was climbing into the bunk while the other climbed out. The only time I saw something close to emotion was on my second night. I was lying in the bottom bunk, just about to doze off, when I heard him come in. He moved quietly, surprisingly so for a guy his size, and I pretended to be asleep, not wanting to get into some awkward half-conversation, but then he sat down on the edge of his bed and just stayed there. He didn't move for a while. I heard a breath, slow and shaky, then another. It took me a second to realize he was crying. Not loud, not even enough to call it that, really. Just one quiet inhale that didn't sound like it belonged to someone like him. I stayed still, didn't say a word. It felt like witnessing something I wasn't meant to see. Eventually, he lay down and the bunk above me creaked as he settled in. I stared at the metal ceiling, wide awake. Whatever his deal was, it wasn't just about being unfriendly. The next morning, he was back to stone-faced silence, but that night stuck with me. A week passed. Then 2. He started saying more, simple stuff. "You done in the head?" meaning the shared sink. Or, "Watch your step," when I was fixing a loose bolt on deck. Still gruff, still distant, but something had shifted. Then came the night I caught him outside, leaning against the railing near the stern, smoking a cigarette. His profile was backlit by the faint glow of the ship's running lights, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon like he was expecting something to rise out of it. "You're not supposed to smoke that close to the fuel drums," I said, mostly to break the silence. He didn't look at me. "I'm not near the fuel drums." I stepped up beside him, close enough to smell the salt on his skin. "You always this fun at parties?" He gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Parties don't come with rusted hulls and 10-hour shifts." "Depends what kind of parties you go to." He flicked the cigarette overboard, watching it arc into the dark. Then, finally, he looked at me. "Why'd you sign up for this?" I blinked. "I don't know. Needed a change. City life wasn't doing it for me." He nodded slowly, like that answer meant something to him. "Yeah," he said. "I get that." It was the first time I felt like he was really talking to me, not just tolerating me. But whatever thaw had started, it didn't prepare me for what I saw the next night. What I woke up to. What he did while he thought I was asleep. And it changed everything I thought I knew about Wade. It was the sound that woke me up. Not loud, but enough to pull me out of the half-dream I'd been drifting through. Something had shifted in the room. You live in tight quarters with someone long enough, you start to pick up on the smallest changes. How they move, breathe, even how the mattress creaks under their weight. I kept my eyes closed, heart thumping a little harder than I wanted to admit. I heard Wade climb down from the top bunk, slowly, quietly. There was a pause. Then I felt it. The mattress dipped beside me. Not the top bunk. My bunk. I stayed still, not even breathing. Part of me wanted to sit up, ask what the hell he was doing, but another part didn't. Another part was curious, confused, nervous. It was like my whole body was holding its breath. He didn't say anything, didn't touch me at first. Just sat there, like he was thinking something through, like he was trying to decide if this was a mistake. Then, His hand brushed the edge of my blanket, just a fingertip, barely there. It moved to my leg, rested lightly. Still no pressure, no movement, just presence. I could feel the heat of him. The room was dim, the faint glow of the hallway light spilling through the cracked door, but I didn't open my eyes. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd see on his face. Maybe I was afraid I wanted to see something. His hand stayed there, just sitting on my leg like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to take it further. Then it left. Just like that. He stood up, climbed back into his bunk, and for a long time I stared at the wall across from me, my chest tight with adrenaline. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I expected everything to feel weird. I expected him to avoid me or be colder than usual. But it was like nothing had happened. Except now I was watching him more closely. He caught me staring once in the mess hall, just looked up from his plate of eggs and met my eyes with this unreadable expression, neutral, but not empty. That night, I waited. I pretended to be asleep again, even though I was wired with anticipation. And sure enough, sometime past midnight, I heard him shift. The creak of his bunk, the soft landing of his feet on the metal floor. But he didn't come down to my bed this time. He stood by the window, arms folded, silhouetted by the ship's security lights. I watched him from under my lashes as he lit another cigarette. Just one drag, then he put it out in a small can he used as an ashtray. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in weeks. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You're not asleep." I froze. I kept still for a beat too long, then slowly rolled over to face him. He didn't look surprised. "I heard you the other night," I said carefully. He nodded. "Figured you did." Silence stretched between us. "What was that?" I finally asked. He looked down, ran a hand over his buzzed hair. "Nothing, don't worry about it." "I am worried about it," I said. "That wasn't nothing." Wade laughed under his breath, short and bitter. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it." He didn't. He just stared out the window again. After a while, he said, "I don't usually bunk with people. I usually ask to be put solo. I only agreed this time because the ship was full." "Do you regret it?" Wade didn't answer right away. Then he turned to me. "No," he said. "I don't regret it." The room felt too quiet after that. I sat up slowly, the sheet slipping down to my waist. His eyes flicked there for a second before snapping back to my face. "You don't talk much," I said. "I don't like talking unless there's something worth saying." I nodded. "And right now?" He swallowed. "Right now, I don't know if I'm about to ruin something or finally stop running from it." We stared at each other, both of us unmoving, like this fragile moment might break if we breathed too hard. Then, very slowly, Wade stepped closer to my bunk. He didn't ask this time. He just sat down beside me again, closer this time, and I didn't pretend to be asleep. He sat there for a long moment, elbows resting on his knees, head slightly bowed like he wasn't sure what came next. I didn't move either. I just watched him, trying to piece together whatever storm was going on behind those tired, unreadable eyes. The ship rocked gently beneath us, the muffled hum of the engines filling the silence. Everything else, the metal walls, the cramped space, the ocean outside, faded into the background. "I'm not good at this," Wade said finally. His voice was low, careful. "Whatever this is." I nodded slowly. "You're not exactly subtle." He smirked, the faintest curve of his mouth. "Wasn't trying to be." I sat up straighter, the blanket falling to my lap. He glanced down, just for a second, and then looked away again, jaw tight. "You know," I said, "you don't have to pretend I didn't feel that. The other night." He rubbed his hands together. They were calloused, rough in a way that made you imagine every knot he'd tied, every rope he'd hauled across the deck. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, "but I didn't know how else to be near you." That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was romantic, because it was honest. I reached out and rested a hand on his knee, just enough pressure to let him know I wasn't pulling away. He looked at my hand, then up at me. For once, he didn't look angry or guarded. He looked scared, and underneath that, hopeful. "I thought you hated me," I said quietly. "I didn't," he replied. "I just didn't know how to handle you being here." "Why?" Wade leaned back slightly, resting against the edge of the bunk. "Because I've done a pretty damn good job building walls around myself, kept everyone at arm's length, kept it simple. Then you show up smiling, asking questions, acting like people matter, and suddenly suddenly you're sitting on my bunk at 1 a.m. He gave a soft snort. "Yeah, that." I shifted to face him fully. "You could have just said something. I don't say things. Then show me." His eyes flicked to mine, then down to my mouth. The room felt smaller now, hotter, like the air had thickened between us. I could hear his breathing, slow and heavy, and mine matched it. "Tyler," he said, almost like a warning. "This ain't some movie scene. I'm not looking for one." He hesitated, like he was doing mental calculations, risk versus reward. Then, slowly, like he wasn't entirely convinced it was real, he reached out and touched the side of my face. It wasn't tentative. It was gentle, yes, but there was weight behind it, like he'd been thinking about this, imagining it for longer than he was willing to admit. "You sure?" he asked. I didn't answer with words. I leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't some dramatic, fireworks in the background kiss. It was slow, careful, but real. And when I pulled back, his eyes were still closed for a second longer than mine, like he didn't want the moment to end. When he opened them, I saw something I hadn't seen in him since the day I boarded: peace. "You're not what I expected," I said, brushing a thumb along his jaw. He laughed softly. "Yeah, that makes 2 of us." He stayed in my bunk that night. We didn't do much more than lie there, him on his back, me with my head on his shoulder, our legs tangled beneath the blanket. Every now and then, I'd feel him glance down at me. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. It was quiet, comfortable. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't just a one-night thing. And I knew he knew it too. The morning after was complicated, not in a dramatic, regret, hung over the room kind of way, just in the quiet, tense sort of way where neither of us knew exactly what to do next. I woke up first. Wade was still asleep, one arm draped across his chest, the other resting close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off it. His face, usually tight and unreadable, looked younger in sleep, softer, less burdened. I didn't want to wake him, not because I thought he'd freak out or pull away, but because I didn't want the moment to end. It was the first time since joining this crew that I felt like I wasn't alone. But eventually, the overhead lights clicked on, automatic, harsh, ship-regulated. Wade stirred. His eyes opened slowly, and when he looked at me, there was that half-second of pure vulnerability. Then it vanished, replaced by the familiar stoicism. He sat up, stretched, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. No words. No good morning. Just silence. I sat up too, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "You good?" I asked. He nodded, reaching for his shirt. "Wade." He paused, then turned slightly toward me. "We're not going to pretend that didn't happen, right?" He looked at me, lips pressed into a line. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No, we're not." That should have felt like relief, but something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "Look," he added, pulling the shirt over his head. "I don't do this. The whole talk about feelings thing. I'm not wired like that. I'm not asking for a relationship, if that's what you're worried about." He snorted. "I'm not worried. I don't want to screw this up." I tilted my head. "Screw what up?" He looked back at me. Really looked this time. "You." The way he said it, simple, honest, caught me completely off guard. I didn't say anything for a second. I just looked at him, trying to figure out how someone so closed off could say something that open. "Well," I said, climbing out of bed and pulling on a t-shirt, "good news is, I'm not that easy to screw up." He gave me a look. The corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. "Get dressed," he muttered. "You're late for galley duty." The rest of the day was normal, or at least, we pretended it was. Wade didn't treat me differently. He didn't pull away, but he didn't cling either. We worked our shifts, ate with the crew, didn't linger too long in the hallway. But under the surface, something had changed. It was in the small things. The way he bumped my shoulder with his as we passed in the corridor. The extra coffee he poured and left next to my seat before I even asked. The way he stood just a little closer than he used to. That night, when we both ended up in our cabin again, alone, he didn't say anything. Just climbed down from his bunk and slid in next to me without a word. I didn't need one. But still, I wanted to know more about him, about why a guy like Wade was the way he was. So I asked, "What made you sign onto this ship?" He was quiet for a while. I thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I used to be a firefighter in Oregon." I blinked. "Seriously?" "Yeah, for 6 years." "What happened?" He exhaled through his nose. "Lost a guy in a collapse. My fault, probably. At least, that's how it felt. After that, I couldn't stay." I shifted so I could see his face. "So you just ran?" He nodded. "Yeah, signed up for maritime work. Something about the sea made sense to me. Out here. If something goes wrong, it's usually just nature doing its thing. Less personal." I didn't know what to say at first. Then I asked, "And does it help, being out here?" "Most days," he said. "But then some dumbass shows up with a stupid smile and starts making it personal again." I grinned. "Sounds like a real pain in the ass." He looked over at me, eyes soft. "Yeah, he is." Then he leaned in, just a little, just enough for our foreheads to touch. And for the first time since I'd boarded the Halcyon Star, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few days settled into a rhythm, though it was anything but ordinary. We didn't talk about what was happening between us, not directly, but it was there, in every small gesture, the way Wade would pause just a little longer when our hands brushed. The way he started choosing the same shifts as me, like he was finding excuses to be nearby. No one on the crew seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't say anything. The ship had its own rhythm, its own rules, and privacy was the last luxury anyone cared to lose. As long as the work got done, no one asked questions. Still, we were careful. No touches in public, no eye contact that lingered too long. We kept our distance, and then, when the door shut behind us at night, we closed that distance in silence. It wasn't always physical. Some nights, Wade would just lie beside me, one arm slung over his eyes, both of us staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the low hum of the engines and the slap of waves against the hull. He'd talk sometimes about the places he'd been, about the crew rotations, about the guys who came and went like ghosts. Never too personal, never too deep, but enough. One night, I asked something I'd been holding on to since that first strange moment we shared. "Why me?" He rolled onto his side, propping his head up on his arm. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're quiet. Guarded. You've been doing this for years. You don't get close to anyone. So why me?" Wade was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you looked me in the eye." "That's it?" He gave a small shrug. "That's not nothing." I let that sit. I didn't know what I expected. Some big confession? Maybe. But with Wade, even a simple answer like that carried weight. "What about you?" he asked after a pause. "What about me? Why'd you let me in?" I stared at the ceiling. "I don't know. Maybe because you needed someone to." He reached over and rested a hand on my chest. Not in a sexual way, just a touch. Grounding. "I still do," he said. "It should have scared me." This man who kept so much of himself locked away, saying something so bare. But it didn't. It made me feel steady in a way I hadn't in a long time. The next morning, things cracked. We were in the engine room, helping the chief with a leaking coolant line. Wade was on the lower scaffold, and I was above him, feeding him tools from the hatch above. It was noisy, loud with machinery and echoing voices. I didn't see the slip happen. I just heard the metal clatter, followed by Wade's voice barking out a curse. By the time I climbed down, he was holding his wrist awkwardly. "You okay?" "Yeah," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Just landed wrong." He tried to wave me off, but I grabbed his arm gently. "Let me see." His skin was slick with sweat and oil, and there was a faint tremble in his fingers he couldn't hide. I looked up at him, waiting for the usual pushback, the brush off, but he didn't fight me. I walked him up to the med station and helped him wrap it. Nothing broken, just a bad sprain. Still, he winced every time I touched it. "You've got to be more careful," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Wade smirked. "You gonna start lecturing me now? Only if it means you don't fall off the ship next time." He looked at me, serious now. "You'd care if I did?" I stared at him. "Of course I would. Don't be an idiot." The air between us shifted, less teasing, more raw. Then he said it. "I think about you when you're not around." I didn't know what to say. He'd never said anything like that before, not even close. "I think about you too," I replied. That night, when we were back in our room, Wade kissed me first. It wasn't careful this time. It wasn't measured or quiet. It was like he'd been holding something back and finally let go. And when he pulled me close, it wasn't just want, it was need. But it still wasn't about closeness. It was about being there, being close, being real with each other, in a way neither of us got to be with anyone else. We fell asleep like that, his arm around my waist, my head tucked under his chin, the rhythm of the ship rocking us like a lullaby. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I felt like I was heading toward it. It's strange how quickly something forbidding can start to feel normal. Within a few more days, Wade and I had developed a kind of quiet routine. No one ever questioned why we disappear at the same time. No one noticed that we always took our breaks together, or that Wade, who used to eat in silence and leave early, now lingered in the galley if I was there. Or maybe they did notice. Maybe they just didn't care. The thing about cargo ships is, you learn not to look too hard at anyone else's life. There are unspoken rules out here. Don't ask, don't interfere, don't dig too deep. Keep your head down and your secrets to yourself. So we stayed in our bubble. Small touches under the table. A glance too long. Quiet talks in the dark. Little things that built something bigger without either of us saying what it really was. Still, I started to notice the cracks. Sometimes he'd pull away at night, roll over with his back to me and stay there, silent. Other times he'd get up before me and disappear, skipping breakfast entirely. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd say no. Always no. But the quiet started getting heavier. And it followed him onto the deck. One night, after a brutal double shift rerouting container cables, I found him alone on the stern, hands wrapped around the railing, staring out into the dark. "Wade," I said gently, coming up beside him. He didn't look at me. Couldn't sleep. Me either. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "You ever feel like this is the only place where you're allowed to exist, but also the only place you're not allowed to be?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I get to be myself when I'm in this room with you. But the second I step out, I have to go back to being the guy the first was before. And I don't know if I can keep switching it on and off." His voice cracked just slightly on the last word. And that was rare. Wade didn't crack. "You don't have to pretend around me," I said quietly. He finally turned to me. "Yeah, but we're not alone out here forever." I nodded slowly. "So, what are you saying? You want to stop?" "No," he said instantly. "God, no." He stepped closer, his face just inches from mine now. I just don't know how to live in two worlds at once. I exhaled. Then don't. Pick one. Choose this. Choose us. He looked at me like I'd asked him to open a door he'd nailed shut a long time ago. I've been out here so long, I don't even know if I remember how to choose anything, he admitted. I didn't respond with words. I just pulled him in. His arms came around me like it was instinct. We stood like that for a while, the ocean all around us, wind brushing past like it didn't even notice we were there. Eventually, he pulled back just enough to look at me. I don't know what this means when we dock. I don't either, I said, but I'm not afraid to find out. He nodded, the lines in his face softening. Okay. When we got back to the room that night, something was different. Not the way he touched me, but the way he looked at me. Like he was finally allowing himself to see this for what it was. Not a secret, not a slip-up, not a phase, something real. And when he whispered my name before he kissed me, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like permission. The day we reached port, I thought I'd be excited to touch land again. A week earlier, I would have been counting down the hours to decent Wi-Fi, a real coffee, maybe even a hotel room that didn't rattle every time someone dropped a wrench 2 decks below. But now, as the skyline of Yokohama crept into view, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Wade stood a few feet away on the deck, watching the cranes grow larger as we neared shore. His posture was stiff, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. He hadn't said much that morning, just the basics: shift times, inspection lists, fuel intake procedures. Back to business. But I could feel the distance, creeping back like fog over calm water. We were back in the real world. The world where people like Wade didn't let themselves be seen. Not fully. Docking day was chaos, like always. Crews scurried back and forth, barking into radios, guiding container lifts and double-checking manifests. Everyone was moving fast. Focused. Efficient. Except me. I caught myself watching him too much, looking for any sign that the past few weeks had meant as much to him as they had to me. He avoided my gaze. By the time we got a few hours of leave to head into the city, I wasn't sure if I should even ask him to come with me, but I did. He hesitated at first, then shrugged. Yeah, all right. We didn't go far, just a quiet noodle shop tucked down a narrow street off the port. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, private. We barely touched our food. He stirred his bowl with his chopsticks, not looking up. I don't do well on land, he said eventually. Yeah, I'm getting that vibe. He smiled faintly but didn't meet my eyes. Out there, it's simple. Work, sleep, repeat. I know who I am. I know who people think I am. And here? Here, I'm just a guy who doesn't know how to explain why he shared a bunk with someone and didn't want to sleep in the top anymore. I set my chopsticks down. Wade, you don't owe anyone an explanation. I owe myself one. That hung in the air between us. He finally looked at me. I don't regret any of it. Okay, but I'm scared shitless of what happens next. I leaned in slightly. You don't have to figure it all out today. His gaze dropped to the table. What if this was only real because we were out at sea? What if it doesn't survive the coast? I reached out, fingers brushing his hand. Then we find out, together. He didn't pull away. After dinner, we walked the waterfront in silence. The harbor glowed under streetlights, the breeze light and cool against the back of my neck. I kept waiting for him to speak, to say something, but he didn't. Back on board, we returned to our cabin. Still quiet. As he changed, I watched him from the edge of the bed. His shoulders were tense, his movements mechanical. But when he turned to face me, shirt in hand, he looked different. Resolved. I'm staying with my sister next month. Between contracts. I blinked. Okay. She lives outside of Seattle. Quiet town. Got a spare room. I didn't know where he was going with this. Then he added, You ever come through that way? You should stop by. My heart skipped. You inviting me? He nodded. Yeah, I think I am. I stood up, crossed the space between us, and kissed him. Softly, no pressure, just presence. Then I will." We didn't say anything else that night. We didn't have to. He climbed into my bunk like he always did now, tucked his arm around my chest, and held me like he was finally sure of something. And maybe I was too. The ship pulled away from Yokohama 2 days later, bound for Honolulu, and the ocean felt different this time. Wade stood beside me as we watched the coastline shrink into the haze. He didn't speak much. He never really did, but his hand brushed mine, subtle and quiet, and stayed there. And that said more than anything. We were back in our little world again. The walls of steel, the stretch of sea, the rhythm of ship life. But now it wasn't just a routine. There was something else between us. Something unspoken, but very much alive. That night, he didn't wait for the lights to go out. He climbed into the lower bunk with me like it was the only place he belonged, then leaned his forehead against mine and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe out here." I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just kissed him and pulled him in close, and we stayed like that until sleep took us both. The rest of the trip passed in weeks, then days, then hours. When we hit Honolulu, contracts were ending. Crew were rotating out. Wade and I both had our names on the list to disembark. Him heading to his sister's place, me with nowhere in particular planned. "You got someone picking you up?" he asked as we hauled our gear down the gangway. I shook my head. "Nope, just me and my duffel." He paused, then scratched the back of his neck. "You, still thinking of that Seattle stopover?" I grinned. "That offer still good?" He looked at me like I was an idiot for even asking. "Yeah, it is." We shared a cab to the airport, 2 hours of waiting at the gate, a long flight. Then, a drive through sleepy Washington roads in his sister's beat-up Subaru. By the time we pulled into the gravel driveway of her quiet farmhouse, the tension I'd felt that first night in our shared bunk was a distant memory. Her porch light flicked on as we approached. Wade turned to me, keys still in hand, the engine idling. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "Neither do I said. "But I know I want to find out with you," he nodded. "Then let's go inside." And we did. The sailor I shared a bunk with turned out to be something I never expected. Honest, flawed, guarded, but real. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the best things sneak up on you when you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, sharing close quarters with someone you barely know, until one day they know you better than anyone else ever has.